Well, thank you very much for the invitation, Lewis, and the introduction. I won't give any more introduction about myself because the next 25 minutes will be talking about me, but hopefully it'll be useful to you as well. So I'm just going to share my screen here and we'll get on with the presentation. So I'd like to say hello to all of my existing friends in the community in Alberta, and also very pleased to meet some of my some new friends. You can always reach out to me and have a conversation, whatever platform you'd like to use. So this morning, I'm going to talk about curiosity in the shape of mastery. It'll be about my journey from being a beginner to being a master and what that looks like, and finding myself having to go back from a master to a beginner's mind again. So we'll start off by going from beginner to master, and I'll tell you about how I went from there to there. But let's start at the beginning. I started off many years ago as a full stack developer, and a full stack developer looked very different back when I called myself that. So when I got into software development, I read lots of books about software development. That's part of the job to become skilled. But I can't remember most of those books, but the books that I do remember, I remember for a reason, because they tweaked my curiosity a bit. Here's the first one. It's called The Elements of Friendly Software Design. This piqued my curiosity because it had the word friendly in the title. Friendly software design. That was new to me. So I got the book, I read it, it kept my curiosity all the way through. First of all, it gave me a list of UX principles. We all know them now, but at the time they were brand new to me and I didn't know the significance of them the way that I know it now. Know your audience, speak the user's language, that kind of thing. There was one other thing that that really stuck with me, and that is he encourages us to learn from other people-facing disciplines. So Paul Heckel said, I'll give you an example. If you're in Amazon and you buy a 200-page book on Roman mythology, would you like Amazon to say, do you want another 200-page book on Roman mythology? Or would you like Amazon to say, would you like to see a trick? So that's something that Paul Heckel taught me, that point of view. I've got a link at the bottom here of all of his principles, but the payoff was a seed that would continue to grow. I'd started moving from software to user experience. Here's another book, Design Patterns, Reusability. I was hooked by those titles. I liked patterns, I liked being a toolsmith. And they're saying a pattern is a well-honed solution for solving recurring problems. The book appealed, but it didn't live up to its appeal because it wasn't solving the problems that I had to solve. But there was a payoff, and it's a pointer to another book that was the inspiration for this one. And that book, many of you I know will have heard of, is called A Pattern Language. It's by an architect called Christopher Alexander and some other people, but we only ever remember Christopher Alexander. And it was talking about patterns. I was hooked by the title. And a pattern, in his view, is not an individual thing, but something that exists in interlocking sets. That's a little bit different. I like that idea. For example, a pattern of lighting can relate to a pattern of seating in a building. Now, interior designers know this, but apparently the builders of airport waiting areas do not. So the payoff was the big concept, interlocking patterns, but they weren't directly applicable to my digital work. Could I be more like an interior designer than a builder of airport waiting areas? That is the question. Anyway, by now I'd added pattern languages to my mix. The final thing I added was information architecture. Through the book, the Polar Bear book, we've all read this book, but you probably didn't read it when the cover was this color and the title, well, the subtitle was this simple. Anyway, this was a brilliant book. It maintained my curiosity Lots of new concepts, lots of new vocabulary, lots of new skills. It too sowed a seed which grew over time. So this is where I was. And I started wondering, and wondering is curiosity without an external hook. It's kind of an internally generated curiosity. I noticed that books about information mentioned users, but not much. And books about users mentioned information, but not much. Could UX and IA support one another, just like the lighting and the seating arrangements supported one another? I mean, they were both parts of a solution after all. Could it be possible? There weren't many books about it, but there was one. And this really appealed to me. You can tell why it appealed to me. Look at the title: Pervasive Information Architecture, Designing Cross-Channel User Experiences. Hey, both of the keywords I was looking for. It's an interesting book, but not quite what I wanted. But it gave me lots of new concepts, lots of new vocabulary, but it didn't translate into skills. Now, if you're looking for one book that you might be interested in reading, this is the one. It's fun, it's quirky, it's quite a romp through a set of principles. And I would recommend, if you're looking at this, that you go onto Amazon and do a look inside, because they have a very quirky style. It will appeal to 50% of the people, and it will definitely turn off 50% of the people. But for the right 50%, this is a great book. And the payoff for me, however, was validation. There was definitely something to be said. It's an intersection that's worth exploring, much more to be done in this space. And I did it. I spent several years exploring, blogging, and training in this area. And as part of that exploration, I was wondering where else I might get ideas. So I looked at a number of related disciplines: design thinking, jobs to be done, outcome-driven innovation, psychology. 2 of them made the cut and 2 of them didn't. Not time to explain why, but the ones that I did keep were the jobs-related ones. So this is where I am now. And at this point, I can say we all have journeys, and this is where I ended up. For me, there was a lot of curiosity involved, but you don't have to have curiosity to become a master. But I've noticed that when you are a master, whether it's Kung Fu or cello, you will become curious about your mastery. So Martin, you're a master, you say. What does that look like? Well, I'll show you. I'm going to take one example of simple bank statements and see how we can unfold this. So over the years, bank statements have changed from paper to interactive online to mobile. The improvements were good, but most of them were interaction-based. Users were considered, but mainly in terms of product usability. What I want to show you are other ways to consider users that lead to some great opportunities. And they're driven by some precepts that you might find interesting. First of all, nobody wakes up wanting to look at their bank account. Nobody wakes up wanting to attend a talk called Curiosity in the Shape of Mastery. There's always an underlying reason. And generally speaking, I would say that people consume information for a reason. And if we can understand that reason in enough detail, maybe we can address the reason more directly. And in the jobs to be done world, they would ask a straightforward question: what job is the user trying to get done by looking at a bank statement? And the answer depends on who you're talking to. A teenager may say, have I saved enough to buy that new mountain bike? A pandemic support recipient may say, have I been paid yet? So let's take one of them. Let's take the teenager and see how we would work with that. His job is, have I saved enough to buy that new mountain bike? How can he solve that problem? How can he answer that question? He can find out the cost of the bike. He can find out how much he saved. You can calculate the difference. Any apologies needed? I call the teenager he. That's long habit, and sorry if I slip into the gender specific terminology. Anyway, the boy wants to find out the cost of the bike, how much he saved, and calculate the difference. We can imagine now that instead of looking at a bank statement, we could give him a little snapshot of that information for a specific account dedicated to saving a bike and show him all of that information. We could do it on the web, we could do it on the mobile. Jobs are solution agnostic, so we don't have to do it on the web and mobile. Hey Siri, have I saved enough to buy that new mountain bike? Or we could do push notification. This is a general process that we can use for all kinds of jobs. So the teenager may be looking at things a different way. He may want to know when he'll be able to buy that new mountain bike at the same rate of saving. Or he may want to get that bike by the start of the cycling season. How does he have to change his rate of saving to make that happen? That's a little bit more of a complicated calculation. For the pandemic recipient, have I been paid yet? How will I manage if I haven't been paid yet? And you can even apply these questions to users of your own products. There's some other aspects to this approach. Jobs have emotional and social correlates as well. And we can play with these a bit. So if we go back to our teenager, he may have the emotional and social goals like this. I want to feel good about the progress I'm making towards buying the bike. I want to show my progress publicly to help motivate myself to saving more seriously. What can I do? Well, first of all, he thinks I could make a flyer with the status from the bank and a picture of me and the bike and walk down and put it on the notice board in the bike shop. The bike store owner is really pleased with this idea because he wants to show how people are going to be buying his product. For the teenager, he lives a long way away from the specialty bike store, so he wants to make the process more efficient. Could he email the document to the bike store and get the owner to put it on the notice board? Sure, the owner's happy with that. In fact, the owner is so happy with this process that he gets other people doing the same thing, and he displays that information on a monitor in his window, and it gets attention from passers-by. Hey, I'm showing people who are buying my bikes. And then we want to make it real time, so we persuade the bank to offer the feed to the owners of the store. Getting entrepreneurial now, there are many other people who may want to use this idea. The banks are quite interested. They do it, and it does benefit the bank because the bank shows the same displays in their branches and in their windows and on their website. So these are some of the ways that looking at emotional and social contexts can help the solution unfold. A couple of interesting things about this example. When I started building it, I didn't actually predict where I would end up, and I didn't know that this would be the outcome, and it's actually not the final outcome. I can continue to riff on this and come up with more steps. But the solutions did seem to unfold from the previous ones based on certain principles. And I want you to remember that quote because we'll meet that a little bit later on. So you asked, hey, Martin, what does mastery look like? That's what mastery looks like for me. But I got a shock recently. I was trying to explore the notion of information places, and there weren't any books. So I thought, who knows about places? And I remembered Christopher Alexander, the one who wrote the pattern language. I wonder if he's still writing about that. And yes, he was. He wrote a book, actually a series of 4 books, but the first one is called The Nature of Order. And this is a fabulous, fabulous book. The scope is no longer architecture, but absolutely everything. What makes things coherent and a joy to experience? Churches, flowers, art. Could it include my design? Could it include yours? This was a deep challenge to many of my ideas about design. It challenged my ideas about entities and relationships. It challenged my ideas about what makes a good design. And it challenged my ideas about the process for making good products and many others. But these are the three things I want to share with you right now. Okay, first of all, challenging my ideas about entities and relationships. On the left is me, a total reductionist. I've got models for everything, information, users, solutions. Alexander's completely different. He's holistic, recursive, not hierarchical like I am. His approach applies to everything, but it doesn't model anything. And I looked at some of the examples of his work, one of which is here. I would like to become a little bit more like this type of feeling in my design. And this design is a consequence of how Alexander thinks about things. Here's a picture from The Nature of Order, and the way I look at it, and most of his readers will look at it, is in terms of entities. There's a tree, a grassy verge, a road, and the tree has branches and a trunk, and the grass has clumps, and the road has a verge. Alexander looks at it differently. He talks in terms of centers, and the first center he tells us about is the shaded part of the tree. And this has a name. It's called a crown. Okay, so far it's not too different from the reductionist approach. And then he shows us another center and everything changes. This is a center, but it's not part of anything. It's kind of a donut area under the tree where the cyclist is resting. But it's not part of anything. It's made from the tree, the grass, and the space between them. And we don't have a name for it. But it's just as real as the crown of the tree. We experience it, we engage with it. It has affordances. Once we recognize it, we can design with it. So this was challenge number one. What we see is constrained by our language. What we see is constrained by our models. How can we get past that? What are we seeing or what are we not seeing that would be useful? Sorry about that. So second challenge. Oh, sorry. Okay. In Alexander's world, centers make centers and are made by centers at all scales. This sounds like his pattern language, and it is, but it's an extension from architecture to everything. So in this picture, a road is not just a road, but it works with the grassy verge to give an integrated flow into the picture. Let's take away the road. Okay, it didn't do it very cleanly, but it feels different. The tree is no longer a resting place. It's more of a destination that I would make an effort to move towards. This whole idea became very influential for me. I got good at seeing centers, manipulating them in my house and my garden. It was totally transformational. I got totally different feelings, even changing one element. But this is in the physical world, my home, my garden. Are there any counterparts to this in my digital design world? That was challenge number one. What about what makes a good design? Well, for me, I had criteria for many different things, for usability, for terminology, for metadata, for content. Alexander has just 15 fundamental properties that characterize coherence and good experience of things. And there they are. First time I looked at those, it's kind of first time I looked at Henkel's usability criteria. There's something there, but I don't know what it is yet. Some of them looked approachable. They were geometrical, they were structural, boundaries, good shapes, symmetries, deep interlock. Others looked a little bit more woo-woo, the void, simplicity, and inner calm. But there was kind of an inner calm in that room of Alexander's that we saw a couple of slides ago. So I played with these properties and I got to see them in the natural and the built world. And yes, they made things coherent. And I was really pleased to see them in some of my design concepts. So if you think back to the bank statement example, yes, there's deep interlock and ambiguity between the teenager, the bank, the bike shop. Where does one stop and the other begin? There were echoes, the bank's logo and the boy's image showing the bike store's display, and all cyclic permutations of that. So here's the challenge. If I can learn to notice these characteristics more and more in products I design, can I make more of them? Well, the answer to that question is the nature of process. Good properties come from following good processes. What this means is I shouldn't try too hard to design interlock and the void and calmness themselves. I should just follow good processes. And the best process isn't always the way we habitually do it. Alexander's got some great examples. One of them is when we're building on a new lot, should we place the house or the garden first? And Alexander says the garden. The garden is where we're going to spend a lot of time. We want it to be beautiful. Alexander says we should place the house in the ugliest part of the lot and leave the most beautiful part for the garden. Interesting. I thought so. And then another one, when building a new house, why do we place the electrical plugs before we know how the user will use the house? Well, because the electrical plugs are placed by electricians who know about electrical plugs, but they don't know anything about me. So those are some bad processes. What is a good process? And Alexander says, one that we don't try to engineer en masse from day one, but one that unfolds step by step, that fits in with previous steps, and that is an appropriate next step. And that sounds a little bit familiar. The bank statement, I asked you to remember a phrase, solutions seem to unfold from previous ones based on a certain process. And here we have it. And on the right, here's the process that we followed. So here's my challenge. I've got one process for developing a certain type of solution, but I build other types of solution as well. What would be good processes for building those? So this is where I am. The final step is a combination of UX plus IA plus jobs plus the nature of order. It's got rough, fuzzy edges, unlike the other ones, which are pretty clear cut. Where do I go from here? I don't know where I'll go from here, but I know it'll be somewhere interesting. Now, I promised that I would talk about the shape of curiosity as well. And I'm not going to show a lot of slides, but I'm just going to tell you a little journey that I had when I was putting this talk together. So in our journey together, we saw different dimensions of curiosity. We had mild curiosity and burning curiosity. We had external and internal triggers. We had various payoff profiles. Sometimes there was no payoff. My IA nature kicked in. Could I come up with a framework that will help us design? And I struggled with it. And I looked online and I found, oh, there's a 2x2 table of curiosity. And I looked some more, and there's a 5-dimensional curiosity matrix. This was getting worse, not better. I was getting less curious, not more. And then I remembered Haeckel. Think about other disciplines. So then I remembered Alexander. Is curiosity more like a deep interlock between us and the world? Should it be described using Alexander's properties rather than a 5-dimensional matrix? And what about triggering and satisfying curiosity in our designs? It's more than just showing you something if you give me your email address. Maybe it's more like Amazon asking, do you want to see a trick? Or maybe going on a mutually respectful journey together, hopefully like we did today with all of our presenters. I like that possibility more. So that's it. I'd like to pause now and take any questions if you have them.
Wow, thank you so much, Martin. I think it was not only inspiring, but at some points I really felt touched. It was poetic. So I have to say, wow, I think I will revisit your talk a couple of times, and most likely will ask more questions about it in a more personal manner. But here I would like to bring a question from Susan Koch, and her question is, do you see living systems designed as being aligned with Christopher's teachings or vice versa?
I don't know the discipline, but I will say that Alexander talks about the commonalities between the living world and the built world, and many of his chapters have two parts. One will be examples from the natural world, how a plant will grow from a bud to uh, uh, a fully closed flower, to a fully open flower, and they're beautiful at every stage, and they unfold naturally from one to the other without suddenly something ugly and unwholesome appearing in the middle. And maybe that's, he says that good buildings are built the same way. We build the first part, and then we see where we are and what would be a good wholesome next step, and we try a couple of things, and but it's done based on the context, same as life unfolds from naturally from a bud to a fully formed flower. So I suspect that Alexander would be very supportive of that point of view, or very much aligned with that point of view.
Wow. And in that sense, as you mentioned, life is unfolding, and once you touch the sense of achieving mastery, and then going back to the process of having a beginner's mind, how do you deal with all the mental and emotional baggage to leave everything behind and get into something absolutely new?
Um, I don't find it very hard because I think curiosity is not a mechanical thing. It's more like the deep interlock between me and the world. It's a playful and a natural thing rather than a chore. So part of my character is the playfulness of ideas and how they hang together. So I don't really find it, I don't find it hard. I did use the term beginner's mind for a reason, because I'm no longer a beginner. Um, but in this area, I am a beginner, so I have a certain humility that I think that's the main character that you have to have, is a little bit of humility, and that's why I said I was shocked when I went into the nature of order and found that it challenged so many of my thinking. But I was humble enough to say not to discard it, but to play with it.
Wow, that's not only admirable. I want to learn more of that. I think there is a always a possibility to learn something new, but at the same time, yeah, especially during these times, it's hard to see beyond the ordinary. So I really think your talk is going to open quite a lot of new doors, at least now that we're enclosed in the same doors for a while. I
Right.
have to thank you so much. Well, for the audience, we have we're giving away a book from Martin. So I'm really excited to be able to read more about him. And as always, what can I say? You know, it's a pleasure having you in the community, and now having the possibility to have more exposure to your ideas. Thank you so much. And
Well, you're very welcome. I'll say goodbye, everybody now. Bye-bye.